Welcome back to Property Now, where we are on a mission to make you the property pro in your group chat. In today's episode, the first episode of 2024, we discuss the rental crisis in Australia. It is a really big topic and it impacts you no matter what your involvement in the property market is. We really wanted to share our perspective on this topic and discuss it as a group. And we also spill a bit of tea on some rental horror stories from our own personal experiences. We really hope you enjoy. Make sure you are subscribing and following Property Now. Okay. First one back. I have first week back jitters. I've forgotten how to talk with a microphone.
It's only 2 weeks, right? But
it felt like a long break.
It did. It did actually.
Technically, we came in during the break to record, right?
Yes.
It certainly looked like
it. We had no break.
We kept pumping out the content.
Yeah, that's important to mention.
No, we did have a good break. And for people that are listening and not watching, we are a man down this week. Chris is still enjoying his holidays. Well deserved, I would say. So it's just the three of us. But yeah, welcome back, guys. And very excited for all the combos that we're going to have in 2024.
Yeah, absolutely.
All things property. It's going to be a big year. And I thought we'd kick things off. So first week back, we're easing back into it. Well, I'm definitely easing back into it slowly but surely. And a topic that I wanted to discuss with you both today is, it's a big topic. So I'm going to try and sum it up in a sentence, I guess. But to do with the rental crisis, rental horror stories, and it's been playing out for a while in the media. And it's something that I feel like we've sort of lightly touched on, but we haven't really gone that deep into it yet on the podcast. And what sort of sparked this topic is a piece that we've all read that was in The Guardian earlier this week. And it was discussing the actual headline of this article was "The Greens ring in the new year with a new fight over Australia's housing crisis." And I know we've all read it. For the listeners that maybe haven't, a quick little summary. So essentially the Greens are pushing the Labor government to make real change to address the housing crisis this year. I think the thing that's been at the top of the Labor Party's agenda is this Help to Buy shared equity scheme in terms of addressing the housing crisis. That's what, the Albanese government is really putting as their kind of top of the list. And in this piece, it's explaining how the Greens are sort of essentially saying, well, that's not enough. And instead, they're calling for rental freezes, rental caps, and other measures that they think will be, I'm kind of putting words in their mouth, I guess, but effectively how I read it is they're saying that that's a better option and that's actually going to make real change for the housing crisis, whereas what the Labor government is proposing isn't. So that's the article, this sort of fight that is, this political battle that is happening at the moment between the Greens and Labor. What do you guys think? I mean, I guess it might actually be good to start with what is the Help to Buy scheme? And I'm kind of looking at you, Jace, as maybe being able to give a quick little synopsis or explainer of what the Labor government is working on, because it's not actually in place yet.
Yeah, that's right.
They're working on it.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Because it's been in the news since last year.
Yeah.
Right. And so I think the main thing is that it's not legislated.
Okay.
Right. So I think that's where the Greens are holding the government to ransom about it, because I believe they need support from the Greens.
Yes, because the coalition are
probably
obviously not backing
disagree with everything that Labor does, right? So essentially it's the government helping home buyers make the property more affordable, not in the way of a grant or savings on stamp duty, but allowing the buyer to purchase, or the government will help you buy the property together.
Yeah.
So own it with you, between 30 to 40%. So let's say, for example, just for numbers' sake, if the property is $1 million, then the government will pay $400,000 towards it. So you're really buying a property that's only $600,000. Okay. So that means your deposit's much lower.
Yeah,
right?
and your borrowing capacity can be lower, and it's still...
Yeah, correct. And the loan you need is smaller, right?
Yeah.
So you just imagine if you were buying a $600,000 property versus buying $1 million property.
Yeah,
but
right.
you're buying it for $600,000, but you're getting $1 million property.
Yeah.
And I think over time you have the option to buy back that 40% that is owned by the government. Yeah. So look, it can work both ways, right? Because if the value of the property goes up after you've bought it, then it will cost more to buy that 40% share of the government. Right. So, for example, a few years later, that property's now gone up by 200,000. It's not going to be the same as paying the government 400,000 to buy their share back.
Gotcha.
It's going to go up, right, in proportion.
Do you need to buy it back? Can the government own 40% or 30%
like
of that
forever?
property forever and ever?
Yeah, I think the details are a little bit light, and the thing with these sort of things is that although that's the proposal, until it's legislated, you don't get the exact full details because it can change, right?
Yeah,
it doesn't
true.
mean that just because it gets passed, it's exactly the same as the way they've proposed it.
Yeah, okay.
But the key thing is, I think from what I read, it's up to 100,000 spots. So it's there to help up to 100,000 homeowners. Or support 100,000 homeowners over 4 years.
Over 4 years,
Yeah,
okay, gotcha.
so I think the first year is like 30,000 places available, and that's the current proposal, and it's mainly to target people on lower income. So I think currently they propose a threshold, like a qualifying criteria. For single, I think it's up to 90,000. I think for a couple, it's up to 120,000. I mean, don't quote me exactly, but it's roughly around there. Yeah. So it's more to be a mechanism to really help people in the lower socioeconomic, sort of range to be able to purchase a home.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think it might be the question around the effectiveness of that.
Yeah.
The number of spots allocated, is it really going to make a dent in solving the housing crisis problem?
Certainly doesn't sound like a lot of spots available.
Yeah, and that's nationally, right? Like, because it's a federal proposal, I believe. So, yeah.
So Zaz, are the Greens saying rent freezes instead of this, or is it like, because
that's sort of how I interpreted it, because I think as Jace was, and again, please don't quote me on this, but as Jace was saying, they kind of are holding the Labor Party like at hostage, at ransom. What am I trying to say?
Same thing.
You know what I'm trying to say. Same thing. Because without the Green support, this won't get through. So the article and what it was alluding to is like the Greens are just pushing for real action, real change. And what they're saying will do that is these rental freezes, rental caps. Amongst other things, there were also some points raised about dental, but we talk about property, so we won't go into that. But yeah, that was the crux of this piece.
Yeah, because say it's 100,000 over 4 years, surely, from the Greens' perspective, there's a lot more renters than that, right?
Yeah.
So that not every renter is not able to own a property because of the current obstacles, and this is not going to solve that obstacle for everybody, right?
Yeah.
So yes, you do help some people in situations that fit the criteria and the targeted support, but what about everyone else who's not going to benefit from this?
Yeah.
They'll continue to rent. Right? So the issues that they're facing as a renter with, say, significant increases in rent, or for example, landlords or property investors not providing adequate condition of the accommodation, is still going to be an issue, right?
Yeah, I feel like that makes a lot of sense to me, how you've just explained that. Like this initiative from Labor, but I think it sounds like a good idea to me from my, like the way you've explained it and how it works. I think, I can see how people would really benefit from that. But I think the fact that the scope is really like limited, because it is only going to benefit 100,000 couples, families, singles over the next 4 years. So what is like the bigger picture? How do we kind of help more people that are outside of that pool? Because obviously the majority isn't going to benefit from that.
Yeah.
So I mean, and I don't know if rental freezes or rental caps, like I guess if we're saying just for the purpose of, to get our perspectives, if it's either this or that, like, what is better? And that's a genuine question. Like, what do you guys think would be? It's hard to answer, I suppose, but
Yeah.
are we sort of thinking what Labor is suggesting is a better idea, or what the Greens is calling for is maybe a better idea in terms of addressing the housing crisis?
They're almost solving two different
problems.
So it's not the same sort of thing. Like, we're trying to get people into housing on one end.
Yeah.
And we're trying to ease the rental crisis on the other end, which can get people into housing as well, but they're kind of two different things, right? So
Yeah, that's right.
I don't like this whole, there's only one solution and we're going to back one solution and that's it. Like, there should be, you know, there's obviously, we talk about it all the time. There's housing supply issues, there's affordability issues, there's homelessness issues. There's probably a number of things we can be doing, and it shouldn't be one or the other.
Yeah.
I don't know if a rental cap, I actually don't think it's the way to go. I know there are some places around the world where there are rental caps. So I think Manhattan has a rental freeze.
Have we ever had that in Australia?
I don't
Has
think
that ever been a thing, rental caps?
Not to my knowledge. They definitely have it in
Google
Manhattan, which is why all the characters on Friends have incredible apartments and they can live there for so long. But that is limited to, I think it's age pensioners and people with disabilities,
right?
Up to a certain who earn up to $50,000 US, or something along those lines. Again, don't quote me on that one either.
That should be like the sub headline of this episode. Please don't quote us. But look, it's a thing around the world. It has kept prices sort of down. It does make Manhattan a little bit more livable, but again, that's not for everyone, right? So if you know, we couldn't access that if we were living over there, if we were American citizens living over there, unless like our grandparents were subletting it to us or something like that. Who knows how it happens? I imagine as well, if they were to bring that in Australia, it would probably be a similar sort of thing in that there would be criteria. It wouldn't just be like for all, you know, I don't even know if that's what the Greens are proposing or if they are saying it's for, you know, lower socioeconomic groups, you know, disadvantaged groups, things like that. That would be able to benefit from like a rental cap.
Well, you're right. We don't know.
Yeah.
But there's been proposals at state level. I think Victorian government has proposed similar things before. They've discussed it in the past. I don't know why I'm looking at you, Jace, to give me.
Oh, yeah, I think so. That's right. That's right. Around, some legislation. I can't recall exactly, but it's, I think it was around taxing property investors.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. Rather than freeze on the rent from memory. Yeah.
Interesting.
But the whole rental freeze, it seems to be like an across the board thing that the Greens are suggesting. Again, I'm not 100. Again, we don't know the details unless this was to happen. But
yeah,
I mean, we can talk about whether or not that's a good idea. What do you think?
Well, I think these things really depend on government policy and decisions to drive that. And when I think about that, it's always around cost, right? So that's what the government always thinks about. So, for example, if you put a cap on rent, I think that's a cheaper option, right?
Cheaper for the government.
Yeah, cheaper for the government because it's not coming out of the government's coffers to pay for things, right?
Yeah, they don't have to give out more grants or more this or that.
That's right. But the argument would be, yes, the government may lose some tax revenue, for example, because when a property investor earns rental income, you'd have to pay tax on it and so forth, right? Assuming that it's not negative, right? And there are many investment properties that are making the property investor money. But I think that won't be a popular decision because it's going to affect everyone that owns an investment property.
Yes.
Right? Similar to the unpopular decision of trying to get rid of negative gearing. And we all saw what happened with the elections with Bill Shorten proposing getting rid of negative gearing. That could have been a solution, for example. But versus the shared equity, it will cost the government more money. But I think the Greens also have a real issue with tax cuts. Right, it talks about tax cuts for billionaires and property moguls. Like, I don't know what's the definition of a property mogul. You know, whether you own one,
someone that owns one property,
one property, you're a property mogul, or is it two, or is it three, is
I
it
want to be
10?
a mogul,
right? So I think that's another issue that they have is that
tax
right,
cuts.
you're providing tax cuts, so that means the government, is getting less money in the form of taxes. But why aren't you taking that and then helping the renters, right? Because you're going to lose tax revenue. Either way.
I think a freeze in rent also, like, could be detrimental to the investment, to an investor. Like it may mean that some investors pull out of property, right? Because it's no longer their best, it's no longer as profitable for them. There's probably other ways they can invest and make money. So you're going to see investors pull out. You're going to see less properties available for rent. And it's just going to be harder in terms of supply.
Yeah.
So it probably has all these knock-on effects.
Yeah,
that
definitely.
We probably won't know for sure unless it were to be put in
Until it
place.
happens.
But
Yeah.
you can probably
5 years later.
Yeah, you can probably predict that it would happen. As an investor, if I want to get, the best dollar that I can
Yeah.
out of my investment property, and if I can't, then I'm probably going to look at alternatives.
Yeah, that's right. And I think it comes down to having a voice, right?
Yeah.
Is that, when it comes, because all these, a lot of these government decisions for the purpose of elections and things like that, right? There's always that underlying motivation.
Yeah.
So what's the voice, or who's the voice representing the renters? It seems like that there's a voice representing property owners, property investors. Right. Native hearing needs to stay. So many Australians are property investors.
Yep.
So when I think the politicians look at that group of people versus looking at the group of renters, who's got a stronger voice? So it is quite good to see that the Greens are really advocating for the renters,
Yeah.
right? Which
Seems to
I
be their
don't think I've
focus.
seen in the past. I've always seen advocates for property investors.
Yeah.
How the Australian economy relies on property investors, property owners, so forth.
Yeah.
So now you've got a voice for the renters
Yeah.
as well. So hopefully that they can drive some policies around it, because I do think it needs government policy change. Because the other argument could be social housing,
Yeah.
that we know that the government does have plans and proposals for more social housing. So does that mean that'll solve or help with the issue, rather than putting, like you said, just a simple freeze on rent or cap, right? And who's there to determine what the cap is?
Yeah.
You can increase rents, what is it, on average 4%? Do you increase rents based on inflation? How do you determine that?
Yeah, it'd be interesting to see what the actual proposed, all the ins and outs of it and how it's
Yeah.
going to work. Because,
Yeah.
like you said, until it's legislation, it's kind of guesswork.
That's
Almost
right.
every article you read or can say a slightly different, angle of looking at it. It would be good to know exactly how they're planning on rolling it out, if they've even got that far with it.
What we do know, Zaz, is there is a problem,
Yeah.
right? Because we see prices going up. We see lines around the block when there's an open home for a rental property.
Yeah.
We're seeing tenants pushed out. We're also seeing some terrible landlords. Like you've talked, Jason, about properties with mold issues and tenants complaining and the landlord not fixing it but still jacking up the rent.
Yeah.
Right. So there are issues there. So we know there is a problem. I think one of the biggest issues as well is, for the property market as a whole, with rents going up the way they are, is we've seen potential first home buyers sort of pausing their aspirations to get into the property market or to buy their first home, because all of a sudden they can't save as much towards their deposit. And this
Yeah.
is the early stage potential first home buyers.
Yeah.
But all of a sudden, if your rent is up $100, $200, $300 a week, that's money you might have been putting aside to sort of get your foot
exactly
into the
right.
door.
Yeah.
So one of the adverse effects here is that we're seeing, if you look at the property market as a whole, who's currently buying property at the moment, it's people that have, seen some equity during COVID and thought, hey, I'm gonna buy something a little bit bigger. It's downsizers that, they seem to be unaffected by all of this.
Yeah.
And it's investors that are still there, but it's the first home buyers that are really missing out.
Yeah.
And I think, a lot of the potential first home buyers, a lot of the younger generations, maybe they're being forced to keep renting,
Yeah.
forced to struggle, forced to move back home or find some other solution. And it's a real problem at the moment, I think.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think that the whole that rental increase thing, like I'm a renter, and I actually like that, we're all kind of in different positions in terms of our experience in property. I'm a renter. Michael, you're a homeowner. Jace, you own your own home. You're an investment property owner. So we all kind of, have different, and you've owned an investment property as well. Michael. So yeah, we've all kind of got different experiences. And I think like I have some friends who have, crazy stories over the last, year or two, sort of as the effects of COVID kind of fizzled out, and the rental market really shot up like crazy. I've been quite lucky to never actually have experienced what I would consider like an unfair or, unreasonable rental increase. I feel like I've gotten quite lucky in that way, where my rent has gone up, but it's never been something that I haven't been able to afford, or I've been in a position where I've thought, oh, I need to move because I can't handle this. But I've had some friends and one of the girl I used to work with, she had a case. She went into the tribunal last year,
Right.
Because a apartment that I believe she'd been renting for quite some time, with a girlfriend of hers, she was notified by her landlord that her rent was going up $350 a week, which I just thought, like, that to me is such an insane. If I was given that notice, I would be out the door the next week. Like, there is no way I would be able to find that money, because similar to what you just said, Michael, I'm trying to save up to buy a home. I've got money going into different pools to try and achieve my goals, and that's just not an amount I'd be able to cover.
Making your own coffee each week is just not going to cut it.
God, no. Cutting out avocado toast, like it's not enough to cut it. And so you see those stories.
What did she do, just out of interest? Because like, are people being forced, if they can't afford, if they can't afford to rent where they want to live, are they being forced to rent further out? Or what did your friend do in this scenario?
She actually moved in with her mum.
Yep.
So they stayed in the apartment, I believe, while they were going to tribunal, and I don't remember. I think the rent was put on hold at what they were currently paying while they were sort of taking the case through that process. And it didn't go well at the tribunal. I think they reduced the increase to, instead of $700 a fortnight, it would be $600 a fortnight more, or something like that. So It was still too much for them, to be able to afford. So yeah, she moved in with her mum, and then sort of just had this whole like life transformation actually off the back of it, which was pretty cool. Went traveling and, did all this stuff. But yeah, they weren't able to stay in that apartment because, that's a lot of money to find.
Yeah.
What's
absolutely.
interesting is how dramatic it's been going up across the board.
Yeah.
But that's because, and I think you touched on this last podcast, Jace, but because it hadn't gone up for a while. So there was a time where I remember when I bought my first property, it was an investment property. And back then it was like, oh yeah, well, you just put up the rent $20 every year.
Yeah, so true.
That's what it was, eh?
So true.
So it was just, everyone sort of knew, it was just an unspoken law.
Yeah, like small sort of incremental.
Every year
like,
it goes up $20 a week or whatever it was.
And that's what the property managers will recommend too.
And property managers will say, hey, it's been a year, we're negotiating a new lease, put it up $20.
Up it a little bit.
And the tenant would go, okay, that's fine.
And if you wanted more,
that.
the property manager will actually advise you against it based on saying the tenant's been a really good tenant. Yeah, that's the range you should increase it, because some property investors would say, oh, can you increase it by 100? Oh, look, I don't think that's reasonable.
And is this sort of pre-COVID?
This was pre-COVID. So this used to be the normal
for years.
Right? For as long as it was. And I was thinking about this.
Bring that back.
I was actually, when you mentioned this topic, Saz, I was thinking about that. I'm like, oh, people aren't just putting it up every year for $20 anymore. And what happened was during COVID, there was pretty much a rental freeze. You couldn't put it up during COVID. In fact, some landlords had to drop their rent during COVID as well. There were rent reductions during COVID as well. That's
Ours
right.
Didn't, but
so, and there wasn't, at the time, there wasn't a big song and dance about, oh no, there's an issue here, like rents are going down. Like it was actually like, as a tenant, you'd think, okay, this is great. So this happened for, COVID went on for quite some time, it seems like a long time ago now, but there was a good couple of years there where this was the effect. During that time also, property prices escalated dramatically. So we saw, 20-25% increases in property prices. The rents still stayed the same, right, during that time. So what's happening now is rents are catching up to, all of this missed all of the missed natural organic rises that we used to see, but also catching up to like the price of property and the value of property, right? The yields that, you know, a property investor would expect. So maybe this is a short-lived thing where all of a sudden there's a dramatic catch-up. Hey, this $300, it would have been $20 a year, but it hasn't happened for the last few years, so it's $300 a fortnight or whatever. So that's maybe something like I can't see this sort of continuing on for too long. I think it's just a massive correction.
Or I don't know what I'm going to do. Move back in with Dad.
That might be the way. I'm sure your dad would love that.
Oh, God. Love you, Dad. Might be a bit much. Dad, the 2 brothers, the 5 dogs. I don't know if I could handle it. That's what I'll say to the Labor government. Please, rental freeze so I don't have to move in with my dad.
But is it this correction? You know, are people, because obviously the rents are going up. If people need to move out, there's still a lineup out the door. So people are paying. People are paying that rent, right?
That's right. Because I think that's a really good point. And what I feel 2023 has been is just being consistent with these shocking, surprising, unexpected corrections that you're talking about.
Yeah.
Whether that be interest rates, whether that be the cost of groceries, the cost of petrol, the cost of rent. There's just been a sharp increase significantly on all the things related to cost of living. Right? Because of, for example, the hiatus of COVID.
Yeah.
Or inflation's gone up so much.
Yeah.
During COVID it was so low.
Yeah.
And it just hit at once. Insurances have gone up. Everything literally has increased significantly, and I think that rent is just in that same basket.
In hindsight, it should have been so predictable.
That's right.
Right?
That's right. Exactly right.
Everyone was predicting crashes and this and that, but like what's happened, it actually makes a lot of sense when you look at it.
Yeah. Yeah. And same thing with the immigration story, right?
Yeah.
Is that they talk about the fact that the rents are going up is because of the high demand for rental properties. You've said, Michael, that 50 people lining up to inspect a home, and I see it on TikTok regularly.
Oh, yeah, that was a big thing in COVID as well. There were so many of those videos where there's like hundreds of people.
But those videos during COVID, that was to buy the property.
Yeah, right.
So that was to purchase the property, and that's why we saw a massive increase in property prices. But now they're rental open houses.
That's right.
So
and
that's
the surge in immigration around there's 400,000 migrants coming through or so forth. But they don't talk about the fact that during COVID
there were none.
There were nobody.
Yeah.
And I remember there was a shortage of, for example, hospitality staff.
Yeah.
That restaurants or cafes couldn't find anybody.
Essential workers.
Essential
and
workers.
Like that as well, yeah.
Right. And the hourly rates were going up significantly
and
for
the construction
businesses.
industry, that was a story as well about getting,
So now that COVID's over, again, this correction thing you're talking about, with immigration coming back as well, hence the flow-on effect of more demand for rental properties as well. So, I think the point is, you have to acknowledge what's happened in the past as well to look at this holistically.
Yeah. I think it makes sense. Like people with the after effects of COVID, people are going to feel the brunt of it, whether you're a renter and your rents have gone up, or you're a property owner and your mortgage repayments have gone up massively. Everyone is kind of feeling the pain. I guess it makes me think, well, so it's not our problem. So what's the government going to do to alleviate some of that pain, alleviate some of that pressure? And I guess that circles back to this whole conversation between, the Greens and the Labor Party, and is what they're doing enough? Is it going to actually be enough to kind of take some of the sting out, whether you're a renter like me or an investment property owner like you, a homeowner like you, is it going to be enough? And I mean, I hope so. I hope that we see some well thought out policy. I hope that their little bickering arguments and stuff can kind of be put to the side, and people are feeling the pain. Again, I feel personally, I'm quite lucky. My rent is high, but it hasn't changed too much since I went into it knowing this is the apartment I want to live in. It's at the top of my budget for, what my rent can be, but it hasn't really moved much. So that's worked. But I've got friends, family members, young families that are starting out and getting their foot in the door of being property owners, and they're have these massive, massive, massive mortgage repayments that they're grappling with. And I feel a lot of empathy, you know, for these people, because if I was in that position, I don't know what I would do.
Well, there's two sides to every story.
Yeah.
And it goes back to, again, an awesome discussion we had a few weeks ago, which was like the boomers versus like Gen X and Gen Z. And media is like pitting us all against each other. There's even like a new Australia Day lamb ad, which is like pitting the generations against each other. But really, you know, there's pros and cons of both. Everyone has a bit of a say, and everyone's kind of right in a way. It's the same here. Media pits like landlords v tenants as like this massive matchup. And there are times where maybe there are some pretty terrible landlords out there. Maybe there's some pretty terrible tenants out there too. So it's not like, oh yeah, landlords are bad, or oh yeah, tenants are bad. It's each case is different, and everyone has a side to the story.
People can be assholes just in general, whether you're a landlord or a tenant. It doesn't really matter. Right. You can be an asshole or you can be a good person. I guess.
That's exactly right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's government policy is what needs to drive the solution.
Yeah.
Yeah, 100%. I think on a scale that will have a real impact to the everyday renter.
So what can they do though?
Yeah, like I think social housing is a big part of it. Mm-hmm. You know, is the government actually building properties, right, to provide social housing? Right? Especially, I think the renting issue, affects everybody, right? Yeah. Just like you're saying, it hasn't impacted you for the fact that you need to look at another option, but your rent has gone up.
Yeah.
Right. However, it will have a greater impact, on other people, or especially the one on the lower socioeconomic.
Yeah, exactly.
It may have slowed down your potential to purchase.
For sure.
Totally.
Your first property.
Yeah.
Totally. So I think the renters feeling the most pain in the lower social economic range, and social housing is something that can really help and support fix that problem.
Yeah.
As opposed to, I think that's the argument could be from the Greens, that your shared equity help to buy scheme doesn't help the person who's perhaps a single mum working 2 jobs. Just because you're going to help buy 40% of the property doesn't mean that single mum or anyone else is going to be able to afford the other 60%.
But it solves a housing issue. So there's really two things, right? On one side of things, from a social perspective, everyone needs to live somewhere. So a house is like a need. A shelter is a necessity.
Yeah.
But on the other side of things, it's also Australia's favourite investment class. So it's like a business on one end, but it's like a necessity on the other end.
That's right.
And all of this policy and discussion is like somewhere in the middle. So how do you appease both sides? So I think the government policy needs to be from a social perspective, but they can't, like this whole Greens trying to cap rents, they can't sort of play in the business side of property. Government needs to play in the social side of property, I believe.
Yeah. No, that makes sense.
Yeah. If you're liking what you're hearing so far, make sure you check us out on social media, where we share a bunch of exclusive content and behind the scenes looks that you don't get in the full episodes. All right. So I also wanted to get a little bit of goss. And again, I spoke about it.
Spill a bit of tea.
Oh, yeah. Spill a bit of tea. That's not tea. Because again, like I said, we've all got different experiences. Like I'm a renter. I've never been a property owner. Investment property owners. I want to hear some rental horror stories, whether it's from your, years ago when you were renters, or your perspective as landlords, or even if you've just seen something really cooked on TikTok and you're like, this was a crazy story. I got a couple, so I can definitely...
Can you kick us off? Kick us off, yeah.
Yeah, so like I said, I've been quite lucky. In terms of rental price increases and things like that. I don't think I've ever really had an unreasonable landlord in that way. But what I have had is landlords that have been completely unwilling to take action to, make their properties livable. And I'm talking about like basic human standards of like what a livable dwelling should be. So my first, I'll be quick, but my first house that I moved into with my partner, and it's actually around the corner from here. It's a very cute, tiny little house. And it was our first place together. So obviously going in emotions first, I wasn't thinking, have we got good insulation or all these things that I probably should be thinking about when I'm like going into a rental. I was just like, oh my gosh, I can see us having our first dinner here and we're going to have a veggie garden out the back. Like I was full emotion, loved this cute little cottage sort of house and thought, yes, let's do it. And the price was good back then. So we inspected it. We moved in June, so winter. We inspected it, I think it was, a month or so before then. So my point with that is that the weather took a turn pretty much as soon as we moved in. It was a really wet winter, insane. Like we had, I think it was 2020 because it was the year of COVID, the year that kind of kicked off, which was 2020, if I'm correct. Yep.
That's right.
So we moved in and it was full winter. It was full rain. We were locked down. And, people living in the house, cooking and showering and all this sort of stuff. We had the most insane and rapid growth of mold that I have ever experienced in my life. And this dinky old house, we had no exhaust fan above the stove and oven, which how did I not notice that when I inspected it? Because that's not a thing. Like that's super weird, right? Because you're cooking, the kitchen has one window that's sealed shut in the middle of the house.
Oh no.
And you've got no exhaust fan. So we're cooking and like there's steam and stuff and the walls were constantly wet, dripping, mold was everywhere. And again, like it's not the end of the world, but I think that like we tolerated that for a very long time. We had dehumidifiers in every room. We were sick all the time because the house had mold everywhere. And the hoops that we had to jump through, like dealing with the property manager, I had to document everything, all these emails, all these phone calls, not being able to get them on the phone. After months of this, I actually remember saying to them, like, can I just speak to the landlord? Like, honestly, get him in here because I feel like any rational person would look at that and be like, oh yeah, this is
Did they come in? Sure.
No, she refused to like let me get in contact with them, which is their job.
It's a good, yeah.
Good, they're doing their job. I get that, but I was like, this has been going on for months, like. And I'm sitting there getting resentful thinking and this is totally fictionalized, but I'm like, this landlord's probably laughing it up.
Property mogul.
Sitting on a pile, this property mogul.
The Monopoly dude.
Meanwhile,
monocle and
I'm sitting here in this house, coughing all the time and surrounded by mold and it's just this whole thing. Needless to say, we did not extend our lease at the end of the lease.
So how long did you stay there for?
We stayed for the full 12 months. And we had a lot of great times in that house and we learnt to live with it. But, they just dragged it out. Like they sent a technician to look at putting air conditioning in because all the windows in the house were sealed shut. I think we had 2 that weren't, but they didn't have fly screens and we lived on a main road.
So they couldn't open them.
We couldn't open, and we did open them. And then we had, dust and bugs and all this sort of stuff coming in the house. That was their solution, was to leave the front door and the back door of the house open. Because you could, standing at the front door, you could see out the back of the house. Like it was a very long, skinny house. So they were like, just do that. I'm like, I live on a main road and we're right on the road. I'm not going to leave my front door open. I love how that's the solution.
Open. Leave your door open.
Just leave your door open.
We're not going to fix anything.
Like, okay,
just leave
when
your door
there's
open.
theft or, rodents running in, sure.
We had a guy that used to work here at Composite with us. And I won't say his name, but shout out to him if he's listening. But he was, might have been around about the same time. He was renting out a place and there was a leak must have been a crack in the roof tiles, a leak in the ceiling.
Yeah, right.
In his bedroom. It was a 1-bedroom place. So like his bed was being leaked on. He probably could have moved the bed, and they refused to fix it.
Like how do you get away with that?
So he's like, and I don't understand how you can I don't know, any investment properties I've owned, if it was reasonable, like you of course you're going to fix it because you want your asset in good shape.
Totally.
And B, you want your tenants, like your customers essentially, if you look at it as a business perspective, you want happy customers.
Yeah.
So I don't understand why, man, there's some tired ass landlords out there. Some, not all, they're not all bad guys.
No, exactly. That was it. I think the landlord was like a older gentleman, had owned the property for a long time. It had been empty for a long time. Like no one had been living there. But yeah, it was kind of like, and it's also, I'm like, if if I just knew this guy, if I could just have a convo with him, I'm sure he's a reasonable guy. Like, I just go down that rabbit hole of like, let me talk to him. He'll sort it out.
My story's on the other side, like
Yeah.
from an investment property that I used to own.
Mm-hmm.
And I actually, every now and then, would talk to the tenant, which was probably a bad...
Did you have a property manager?
I had a property manager,
Yeah, okay.
but we were on good terms,
Yeah.
right? So, and the story actually starts out as a good one because they were in the property for 6 or 7 years. They always paid on time. They were always okay with our $20 increases back in those days. There weren't many complaints, and if they were usually quite reasonable, and we would sort them out quickly. There were never any issues between them and the property manager as well.
Nice.
So they were like ideal, and
Good
they treated the place as if it was their own.
Yeah.
Which is that is like ideal.
Yeah.
Ideal. But what then happened was we decided to buy a principal place of residence in the area that we loved and where our kids were going to school. And to do that, I needed to sell this investment property. So that like a bit of a change in plans from our perspective. But so I did the right thing, right, I believe. And I actually called the tenant and said, hey, just giving you a heads up, we're going to sell. I just want to give you as much notice as possible. You will get official notice from the property manager, but I wanted to tell you beforehand. So, if you wanted to buy the place, you could get things sorted. If you needed to move, you can get things sorted. I don't know who's going to purchase it, but it's likely to be either a first home buyer or an investor. So you might get lucky and be able to stay, but odds are you will have to move out.
Yeah.
But I just wanted to let you know. And he's like, yep, no problem. Thank you for letting me know. We did everything right. Property manager gave them official notice, touch base with them along the way. We ended up purchasing our property and selling that property at pretty much the same time. And we timed it so that I would get the funds from the sale, which I could then put into the purchase.
Yeah.
Perfect. Couldn't have done it any better. But this awesome tenant, up until then, refused to move.
Yeah, right.
So we sold the property with a condition of vacancy at the time that they were first home buyers who purchased.
Right.
Beautiful young couple. Loved that we sold to them because they were just like over the moon. Like it was probably similar to your story of this is going to be our first home and this is where we'll cook our meals and this is where our veggie patch will be.
That's cute.
But the tenants refused to move. And, property managers in touch with a week to go saying, hey, we don't see really any signs of movement. Yeah, we don't really see any signs of movements. And they basically said, and I don't know their side of the story. So again, I always say there's two sides to the story. So I don't want to say they're bad guys where I'm a good guy.
Yeah.
He's not here. They're not here to defend themselves. But they basically said, oh yeah, look, we'll move in 8 weeks. And I'm stressing at this point because it's like, you can't do that because I'm going to lose my deposit over here, and that's going to be pretty terrible.
Yeah.
Right? It's not a good position.
No.
But I don't know, he must have got bad advice. So, no, we don't have to move. I know my rights, blah, 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 blah. We ended up going overtime. We had to renegotiate extensions on both sides. It was the most stressful time ever, all because they refused to move. Ended up taking them to tribunal, and the judge basically said, oh, guys, you got to be out by Friday. And they moved the next day.
Wow.
Like they literally cleaned up and moved the next day. So I'm not sure what happened there, but it was the most horrific.
Yeah. They were like ready to go. I don't know how you could orchestrate a full move in a day.
Yeah.
That's
Again,
amazing.
I don't know that side of the story.
Yeah.
I don't know what it was.
Sounds very stressful.
But it was very stressful, and that's my horror story. I don't know if that's what you're expecting.
Yeah,
from
no,
it.
that's a good
Like,
one. That's a good one. It's good.
Yeah.
Good to see, the different sides. That is a freaky situation to be in, and they went to tribunal. It's another tribunal story.
Went to tribunal,
and it worked in your favor.
Worked in our favor.
Which
It
is
was very stressful again because it's like, what if this doesn't work? If this doesn't work, I'm screwed.
Yeah.
But obviously, we did everything right. So I guess the moral to the story is always do the right thing.
And get advice, get professional
Get
advice.
Look, I had a great property manager.
Yeah.
Awesome solicitor.
And if you're a tenant, move out if you've got enough notice.
Yeah, please.
Just be good tenants. What about you, Jace? You got one to add to the pile?
Yeah, for me, look, it's not too bad. But one of my investment properties, was occupied by three students.
Oh, yeah.
Studying at university. And I recall at the time when they were making an application, they kind of knew that it was difficult for them to secure a rental property.
Yeah.
But I could really relate to their situation. So I ended up deciding to go with them, as opposed to another couple or so forth and the other applicants because
students get a hard run. We got a lot of knockbacks.
You can really like empathize with their situation.
Yeah.
But unfortunately, right?
Uh-oh.
Unfortunately, like a few months into the lease, one of them just legged it. So out of the 3 leaseholders, right, one of them just left. Right? So left the other 2 there. So they had to find someone else. And although they rented the property for a couple of years, they certainly didn't maintain the property well. It was not as tidy and clean as it should be. But I think, again, because I know that they're students, I gave them a lot of leeway.
Such a nice guy.
Even during the inspections, right? Because I feel like, I've been there myself, right?
Yeah.
Kind of got to be realistic on the expectations.
Yeah.
But when they eventually left, they left with really short notice. The property was not cleaned. So they had already vacated and actually moved out, and their lease was still going, like that for that period because they didn't give enough notice, but they just left. So they were
Didn't pay?
They did pay,
Yeah.
but there was still a couple of weeks left and they just left the property, still left their things there. So to take it out to the front for the council to pick it up.
Yeah.
All these
Pretty
things.
disrespectful stuff, really.
That's right. That's right. And they left at a time, I think it was around November. So pretty hard to find a new tenant during that time because it's coming up to Christmas and so forth. And there wasn't much notice, right? So that was the main issue. So, but I think the common theme that I can kind of see is that, whether you're a renter, whether you're a property investor, is that whenever you're dealing with, issues of accommodation or property, it's just so stressful because it's such an added responsibility that you don't have the time and the mental capacity or the emotional capacity for. And the process you have to go through is just quite unbelievable. And I think that's where it has such an impact on people's mental well-being.
Totally.
It's not just the financial side of the consequences, but go to tribunal, chasing up the property manager, constant emails, no response from documenting the situation. All these things have to happen on top of everything else you have responsibility
Going to work, being an adult.
So I think that's where, it's really challenging. From all sides, whether it's the tenant or the property investor. It can really feel for all parties.
Totally. And those little stories, they stay with you and you're like, oh God, that was such a
But you know what to look out for next time.
Yeah.
You'll see if there's any ventilation in the kitchen.
Oh, totally.
Or you might not lease to 3 students, you might lease to one of them and then they can sub, I don't know, there might be a scenario there. So
there's always learnings
it's all
out
learnings,
of that, right?
There's learnings. Yeah. And I think it's good. I feel like when you're in that situation, whether you're a renter or whether you're a landlord or knowing what the process is, and it like you were just saying, it feels like such a tedious process because I got to that point in my story where I was like, what do we do here? Because we can't move out. If we break our lease, there's costs of that. And then we need to also pay, moving is a massive cost. Finding a new place to live is a big cost. I honestly didn't know what we could do other than just sit down, shut up and cop it, which we did.
The property manager is working with you, but they're not on your side.
No, exactly.
Right? Because you're not the one, you're not paying them.
They were a really bad property manager, honestly. Never replied.
Call them out. No, I'm just kidding.
I don't, oh no, I do remember. I don't remember the name, but I remember where they worked. I won't say. But yeah, I think so I guess is there a good place to go for information on what to do if you're a renter and you're in a situation where there's something that is occurring that you think is unreasonable, because I probably wouldn't even know where to start. And I feel like you see on TikTok people going to tribunal and things like that and it just not being worth the time or the energy. It's is that kind of the only option for renters, would you say, if they're in a position where there's something that's maybe unlawful or, occurring? Is that kind of the best course of action?
And I think there are non-profit organisations I think the Tenants advocacy or something along the lines of that do support tenants, because it's not so easy for someone just to go pull up the legislation or so forth around what your rights are as a tenant or what your rights are as a landlord.
I wouldn't understand the legal jargon.
The trade, the fair trading website. So I think that's where you do need that advice for someone to break down the situation and what your options are. But when I hear about these issues, I just think, has it gotten much worse now because of the increasing demand that we're talking about? For rental properties where 50 people lining up for that property, it could be 50 people lining up for that property that's got mold issues. Yeah. And people just have to accept it.
They need somewhere to live.
Correct. Yeah. Right.
And people do. I'm doing another story, but I had a friend that moved into a house that had mushrooms growing out of the wall.
Oh, lovely.
And they moved into it. I'm just like, are you insane? Yeah. And the balcony on the second floor, it looked like it was about to fall off. Like you could see cracks all down the side. And they had inspections and people were lining up to look at it and they moved in. Yeah. Like if that's not a symbol of how dire the situation is for people, I don't know what is. That's pretty grim. I guess you wouldn't have to you'd save on veggie costs. Yeah. Using the mushrooms growing out of the wall.
Yeah, assuming they're not poisonous.
Unless they're poisonous.
Well, yeah. You should get that tested maybe. But
it's definitely a big issue. Yeah. And it's a big issue of late. Yeah. Because I don't remember, say, in the last 10 years, there's been so much coverage around the rental crisis, around lack of supply for properties. Yeah. Just nothing comes to mind. Whether that's in 2010 or 2020, right, just doesn't come to mind around. Oh wow, there's a massive issue facing renters around finding accommodation. Yeah, no, it's a massive issue, and I think one thing that I will say I really do agree with the Greens on is their call for real action this year to tackle the housing crisis. I think yes, that is so important. We've talked about it really from all angles, and it impacts you no matter your involvement in the property industry. If you're a renter, if you're a homeowner, if you own investment properties, if you're looking to get into the property market for the first time, everyone's feeling the pain. So some real action this year would be incredible. Yeah, definitely.
Whatever that looks like. Yeah, and absolutely. We will find out. And we will be back every week
to talk about
it. Well, let's wrap it up there, guys. That was great first week back. No Chris, but Chris will be back next week. And you're actually...
I'll be away next week, yeah.
Michael's
so
away.
Chris is our number one fan this week. I'll be the number one fan next week.
Cheering us on from the sidelines. Well, hopefully we did Chris proud. Hopefully we do you proud next week.
Thanks, guys.
And we'll see you then.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks, guys. The Property Now podcast offers opinions on Australian property news for informational and entertainment purposes only, and they are general in nature. It does not take into account your objectives, financial situation, or needs. It does not constitute professional advice. Always seek expert guidance before making any property-related decisions.